She was the queen the king never loved. All because she slapped his favorite mistress in public. Her entire family was sentenced to death. Perhaps the heavens took pity on them and gave this broken family a second chance. The queen's younger sister Lishi woke up 3 years in the past. On the very day the two sisters were to choose who would enter the palace to compete for the queen's title. Their father looked at her and asked, "Are you truly doing this of your own will?" Even her sister Nina said, "Weren't you just crying saying you didn't want to be queen? Why the sudden change?" Only Lishi knew the nightmare they had endured in their past life. That day the sky was shrouded in clouds, dark as ink. The executioner's blade gleamed coldly atop the scaffold, like death itself staring down. Her father, though innocent, bowed his head in silence, eyes filled with regret. And beneath the platform the king and his mistress wore cruel, mocking smiles. In this life, reborn from the ashes, Lishi swore to take her sister's place and end the tragedy before it ever began. Before she left, her sister held her hand tightly, tears brimming in her eyes. Their father gave a final plea, "Promise me, you must lose." He couldn't bear to see his daughter thrown into the heart of that treacherous palace. But as Lishi stepped into the royal court, she recognized the path before her. It was the same one her sister had led them down after becoming queen. Just then a voice called out. It was the maid who had once served her sister. The sound instantly brought back one of Lishi's most painful memories. On the day of the execution, that maid had stood firm, crying out her sister's innocence until the very end. As Lishi entered the bedroom, another face flashed through her mind. Mary. The woman who dragged her sister and their entire family into ruin. Mary was the king's mistress. In this palace, royal favor meant absolute power. If she ever became queen, the entire court would be hers to control. And the only way to win against her was to let her win first. For now, Lishi's top priority was clear. She had to lose. There were 5 candidates competing for the crown. And as long as Lishi deliberately failed, the past tragedy might never happen again. The first round of the queen's selection was embroidery. Each candidate was to stitch something that best represented themselves. Without hesitation, Lishi chose her sister's favorite flower, lavender. Its meaning, purity, hope, and silence. Just like her sister had been, gentle, resilient, and quietly dignified. The king glanced at her and asked, "Why did you choose lavender?" Lishi smiled faintly. "Because I want to bring your majesty a scent of peace like lavender does." But in truth, there was no deeper reason. She had simply thought of her sister and missed her terribly. The second round began. The task? Visit the royal library and answer a research-based question. Not wanting to appear careless, Lishi also wandered in and casually picked up a book. And that's when she ran into her. Mary, the very woman who destroyed her sister and her entire family. There was no hard evidence, but Lishi knew her sister's downfall was no accident. Mary had a hand in it. This round's question was only answered correctly by Miss Teresa. By all logic, Teresa should be the future queen. But when the king announced the next round, Lishi froze. Confusion flooded her mind. Why was the third task suddenly different? The first 2 had matched exactly with her past life. And now, only the third one changed. Why? The new task was to test the candidate's physical condition. Sure, valuing a queen's health made sense on paper. But honestly, did Mary even need to worry? Wasn't this whole competition just for show? In her past life, the king would summon royal physicians over a single cough from Mary. Yet when her sister fell ill, he never once visited. Not even once. Whatever. None of it matters anymore. Tonight, the results will be announced. Whether it's the king's fake smile or this suffocating palace, tonight will be the last time she sees any of it. Just then, the maid Malaria burst in, panic written all over her face. Lishi's heart sank. A terrible feeling crept up her spine. "Congratulations, Miss Lishi. No, I mean, Your Majesty, the new queen." In that moment, Lishi could only laugh bitterly. She had failed, even at losing. But what's done is done. If this is the path forced upon her, then so be it. The next day, her sister Nina arrived at the palace to visit. She never expected her own little sister to actually become the queen. With a teasing grin, she said, "So, do I have to call you Your Majesty now?" Lishi smiled warmly. Queen or not, I'll always be your little sister. Nina raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. Be honest, did His Majesty fall for you at first sight? Lishi burst into laughter at the thought. Come on, sis. Did you forget that rumor everyone in the capital's been talking about? The king already has someone else. Picking me? Probably just a royal mistake. Nina decided to take a quiet walk through the royal garden. But to her surprise, she stumbled upon the king, with his mistress, Mary. All at once she felt breathless. Her chest tightened. Her heart clenched in pain. Tears streamed down her face before she even realized it. Watching their intimacy, why did it hurt so much? Why did it ache so deeply? Why did she hate them this much? Suddenly her body gave out and she collapsed to the ground. Lishi rushed over the moment she heard the news. The king happened to be there as well. Seeing her sister unconscious and unresponsive, Lishi broke down in tears. Her knees gave out beneath her and she collapsed beside her sister. Could it be that just seeing the king triggered this in her? It wasn't until nightfall that Nina finally woke up. Seeing her sister so pale and fragile, Lishi's heart ached deeply. Soon after, the royal wedding took place as scheduled. Under the watchful eyes of the entire court, she and the king were officially wed. But before the ceremony even ended, a chilling voice brushed against her ear. Let me make one thing clear. Don't expect love or favor from me. Play your role as queen quietly, if you value your life. That night, Lishi sat alone on her bed, replaying the king's words from earlier. The more she thought about it, the more absurd it all seemed. Her principle had always been clear. If no one offends me, I won't strike. But if they do, I strike back double. Just then a maid rushed in with news. His Majesty is on his way. Please prepare for the night. But only Lishi knew, there was no point waiting for a man who'd never come. Yet to her surprise, the king actually showed up. He got straight to the point. I have a mistress. I'm sure you've heard. Lishi instantly understood. This was a warning. Stay away from that woman. Without missing a beat, she replied, I never expected your Majesty's love or favor. Unless absolutely necessary, I won't interfere with your personal affairs. Just as the king was thinking Lishi was a smart, sensible woman, she suddenly turned the tables and asked calmly, And what will your Majesty offer me in return? As queen, I've made plenty of compromises. Don't you think I deserve some compensation? The king paused, then gave a faint nod. Lishi didn't hesitate. My condition is simple. Only my child can inherit the throne. The next morning, her personal maid quietly warned, Your Majesty, if you remain out of favor, your position in the palace will become very difficult. And you must be wary of Mary. That woman will stop at nothing to tear you down. But Lishi had already seen death once. She knew exactly how cruel this palace could be, and this time she would never let the tragedy repeat itself. The next day, the king personally informed Lishi that he intended to grant Mary a noble title. Lishi couldn't help but laugh out loud. This wasn't a consultation, it was just a heads up. Even if she said no, the king would do it anyway. That night, sleep evaded her. The thought of Mary kept her restless. Mary, the woman who had dragged her family into ruin. She wasn't breathtakingly beautiful but had a charm all her own. It was no surprise the king was completely under her spell. But she was like a rose with thorns, one so sharp, it endangered every bloom around her. In her past life, it was her sister Nina who had been torn to pieces by those thorns. And if Lishi stayed silent again, this time it would be her. That's why she had to strike first. That day, Lishi visited the royal library to clear her mind. She hadn't expected to run into the king and his darling mistress Mary. Pretending not to notice, she turned to leave. But Mary couldn't resist throwing in a snide remark. Lishi, never one to be outdone, turned sharply and said, Which palace are you from? Who allowed you into this place? The tension was thick, until the king appeared just in time to intervene. He spoke up, This is Mary, the woman I plan to grant a noble title. Of course Lishi already knew. She just wanted to put Mary in her place publicly. As she turned to go, she smiled coolly and said to the king, Your Majesty, if word gets out that you're having a midday tryst with your mistress, it might tarnish that noble reputation of yours. You two should probably stay put in this room. With that she turned and walked away, completely unfazed. She was the queen unloved by the king. But to survive the treacherous palace, Lishi had no choice but to forge alliances and win favor among the nobles. Though she disliked currying favor, she knew isolation would only lead to one outcome: death. So she hosted a grand social gathering. The nobles exchanged polite pleasantries, one line after another. Suddenly someone asked casually, "Strange. I don't see Baroness Mary here today." The room went quiet. Everyone knew Mary was the king's beloved mistress. Someone whispered, "She probably didn't have the nerve to show up." But before the sentence was even finished, Mary's voice echoed in from the doorway. With a pitiful look, she said, "I don't understand why you all speak about me this way. All I've done is stay by His Majesty's side. Is that truly a crime?" Then her tone shifted, laced with smugness. "His Majesty visits me almost every night. I'm barely getting any sleep that I should probably advise him to be more considerate. The Queen must be so lonely night after night." Such a bold and public challenge to the Queen's authority made many present want to slap her. But to these nobles who valued bloodlines above all, Mary, low-born and brazen, was never truly welcome in their circles. Nina couldn't stand Mary's arrogant words any longer. She stepped forward to defend her sister. But Mary didn't even glance her way, treating her as if she didn't exist. Seeing her sister ignored like that, Lishi couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward, voice cold and firm. "I am the officially crowned queen. You, a mere mistress without title or status, have no right to speak to me that way." Mary's face turned pale with rage. Back in her chambers, she took her anger out on her maids. Fury burned in her eyes. She couldn't accept this insult. She would do whatever it took to drag Lishi off that throne. The humiliation she suffered today, she would make both sisters pay with interest. That day, the king, who hadn't shown up in ages, suddenly arrived at the queen's chambers. He informed Lishi that in 1 week, an important delegation from the kingdom of Christa would be visiting, and she would be in charge of hosting them. Due to religious beliefs, Christians revered pigs as sacred symbols. Consuming pork was strictly forbidden. The king warned her seriously, "Be extremely cautious when preparing the banquet. Any mistake could be disastrous." Lishi didn't dare decline, but the pressure was immense. If he failed, not only would her reputation crumble, but that wretched woman Mary would surely seize the chance to bring her down. This time, everything had to be flawless. No room for even a single misstep. Meanwhile, Mary also caught wind of the upcoming visit. "No pork, huh?" She smirked coldly, and a wicked plan quickly formed in her mind. She immediately ordered her maid to snoop around for the queen's banquet menu. Her goal? To use this opportunity to sabotage Lishi's position once and for all. With a satisfied grin, she whispered to herself, "This is going to be fun to watch." That evening, Lishi sat quietly at her desk, writing out the banquet invitations. Her maid glanced at the list and blinked in surprise. "Your Majesty, is this a mistake? Mary's name is on here." After all, Mary was merely the king's mistress. She had no right to attend such a formal diplomatic event. But Lishi simply smiled. "I'm very aware of that. I invited her to watch her embarrass herself. I plan to ask the noble ladies of Christa how they deal with women like her in their country." The maid then asked, "But where's Lady Sophie? Isn't she always by your side for protection?" Lishi replied calmly, "I already suspected Mary would try something underhanded. That's why I ordered Sophie to prepare a large supply of beef ahead of time. Let's see who wins this little game." Meanwhile, Mary received the queen's invitation. One glance was enough. She instantly knew what Lishi was up to. Fuming, she tore the letter to shreds. "So this is her way of reminding me of my place. She thinks I'll be humiliated? Not a chance." She turned to her maid coldly. "Is everything I asked for ready? The queen is about to find out. I'm not someone to mess with." As night fell, the queen made her entrance in full regalia, graceful, poised, and every bit the sovereign she was. It was her first time hosting such a formal diplomatic banquet. One might expect a few missteps. But to everyone's surprise, she handled everything with elegance and precision, earning praise from all present. Nearby, Lady Sophie leaned in and whispered, "Your Majesty, why did you invite Mary? Everyone here is a duchess or marchioness. Mary is just a baroness, and His Majesty's mistress no less." Lishi replied with a calm smile, "I just didn't want to give her an excuse to go crying to the king." But the truth was, Lishi had far more calculated plans in motion. Just then Mary strutted in, dressed to dazzle, seeking every eye in the room. Polite conversation flowed as expected, but beneath the pleasantries, tension simmered. Soon the Christian noblewomen arrived, elegant and observant. The king prepared to assign a translator to assist Lishi, but to his shock, she spoke Christian fluently and effortlessly. He stared at her in disbelief, a flicker of surprise, and something deeper, crossing his face. As the lavish feast was laid out before them, the Christian noblewomen couldn't stop praising it. Such elegance, such attention to detail, they gushed. Your Majesty is truly exceptional. Mary, unable to resist her moment, stepped in with a smirk. This roast looks absolutely divine. Must be made from the finest cut, yes. But the moment she took a bite, her face froze. Her voice caught in her throat. With a pale, stricken expression, she quickly excused herself and staggered out of the hall. As it turns out, Lishi had long anticipated Mary's scheme to frame her with pork, so she had secretly swapped the meats beforehand. Mary had just served herself the very trap she laid for the queen. Back in her chambers, Mary exploded in rage. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed at her maid. The terrified maid dropped to her knees. I don't know, madam. We checked every step. Nothing went wrong, at least not on our end." Just as Mary was about to lash out again, Queen Lishi stepped into the room, calm, cold, and lethal. Without a word, she raised her hand and slapped Mary across the face. Before Mary could react, another slap landed just as hard. Lishi snapped, "Are you insane? You think a royal banquet, an affair of national diplomacy, is some kind of joke?" Then came a third vicious smack. The triple slap left Mary stunned, her face red and swollen, her pride shattered before she could even speak. Lishi stood tall, voice like steel. "I am Lishi, the lawful queen of this kingdom, the chosen wife of the man you love, and the future Empress Dowager of this nation. And you, Mary, are nothing more than a petty baroness, looked down upon even by the nobles of our own court." Still unwilling to back down, Mary sneered, "Confident, aren't you? But let's not forget, you don't even have His Majesty's affection. You're just a queen in name, an empty title with no love behind it." Lishi didn't flinch. She simply smiled. "You're absolutely right, but that title, queen, still grants me enough power to crush you beneath it." Why was Mary so desperate to become queen? Because in this kingdom the king and queen share equal political power. And when the current king dies and the next heir takes the throne, the queen becomes the Empress Dowager, at which point mistresses like her are often dealt with harshly. Mary knew this better than anyone. Lishi gave her a final warning, cold and clear. "I'll let this slide once. But next time, I won't be so kind." But Mary wasn't shaken. Confident in the king's favor, she dismissed the queen's words like they meant nothing. After all, Lishi had no solid proof. If she acted rashly, it could risk the alliance with Christia, or worse, start a war. As the queen turned and walked away, Mary hissed through clenched teeth, "A flower raised in a greenhouse. Let's see how long you last in the storm." That night the king visited Mary's chambers. The moment he saw the bruises still on her face, his heart ached. "Who did this to you?" he demanded, voice tight with anger. "Was it the queen?" Mary lowered her gaze, tears welling up as she whispered, I can't say." But her silence said it all, clearly pointing the finger at the queen. Enraged, the king stormed out, heading straight for the queen's palace. Yet when he stood before Lishi, he merely offered a polite greeting, then turned and walked away without saying another word. As it turns out, before entering the queen's chambers, the king had overheard a conversation between Lishi and her maid. That's when he learned Mary had secretly swapped the beef for pork, and pork was a sacred taboo in Christia. Was she out of her mind? The thought sent a chill down his spine that if not for the queen's foresight, this banquet could have ended in disaster, possibly even war. But what troubled him more was this. Mary was his beloved consort. Why would she do something so reckless? Was she just foolish? Or was there something darker beneath it all? That night, Lishi jolted awake from a nightmare, her forehead damp with cold sweat. Wrapping herself in a shawl, she wandered alone to the quiet riverbank behind the palace. Just thinking about her sister, framed and destroyed in the last life, made her chest ache with guilt and sorrow. Yes, she had been reborn, but that didn't mean she could see the future clearly. All she could do now was tread every step with the utmost caution. She had already warned Mary. But knowing that woman, she wouldn't back down so easily. How long would this battle go on? Would it really have to end with someone's death? Overwhelmed, Lishi collapsed to the ground, her body trembling. She couldn't help but question, did she really have what it took to defeat Mary? Mary had the king's love, and she'd clawed her way up from nothing. A woman like that. Her schemes ran deeper than anyone could guess. And she was just the queen the king never loved. If she couldn't change fate, would her family have to endure that nightmare all over again? The thought broke her. Hugging her knees, Lishi cried uncontrollably under the moonlight. Just as Lishi broke down, the king suddenly appeared behind her. She quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. The moon is beautiful tonight. I just came out for a walk. But the king wasn't blind, he could see the fresh tear stains on her cheeks. Lishi hurriedly added, it's not tears. Just saliva. He didn't call out her lie. Instead, he gently handed her a handkerchief. The unexpected kindness left Lishi flustered and unsure how to respond. This handkerchief means a lot to me, he said softly. Please return it after you've used it. But Lishi assumed it was a gift from Mary. Of course he'd treasure it. Maybe Mary's recent betrayal had shaken him more than he let on, because for the first time he quietly said, stay with me tonight, please. Lishi looked at his pale face and replied coldly, you should go to the woman you love. Mary is far better at comforting you than I ever could. With that she turned and walked away, never looking back. But just a few steps away, a light drizzle began to fall. Lishi frowned. That idiot king. Don't tell me he's still standing out there? Then she scoffed to herself, whatever. He's not my problem. But even as she said it, her feet were already running back. And sure enough, there he was, soaked, pale-faced, still standing in the rain. If you catch a cold, she huffed, don't expect me to take care of you. Before he could respond, she grabbed his hand and dragged him straight back to her quarters. Along the way she kept muttering, what is going on with you? You're acting seriously weird. But no matter how many times she asked, the king said nothing. Don't tell me Mary hurt him this badly. Lishi rolled her eyes. What a blockhead. With a sigh, she brought him into her room and called for her maids. Get him dried off. If he gets sick, guess who's stuck dealing with it? The maids exchanged stunned glances. The king, spending the night in the queen's chambers. And sleeping on the sofa. Lishi casually ordered, just put him on the bed. I'll sleep in the room next door. But one maid, clueless as ever, chimed in, Your Majesty, the bed's huge. Why not just sleep beside him? Lishi turned and shot her a glare. You can shut up now. In the early morning, the king woke up with a start, only to realize he was still in the queen's bedchamber. Flustered, he quickly sat up and prepared to leave. But just as he reached the door, he was stopped by Milia, one of the queen's maids. In a soft, respectful tone she said, Your Majesty, I only ask that you spare a little more care for Her Majesty the Queen. I know Mary holds a special place in your heart. The king paused, startled. How could a mere maid know anything about his past with Mary? My late mother told me, Milia said quietly. Could it be? His relationship with Mary had long been known. Was there something more behind it than even he realized? But then he remembered the words he had thrown at the queen on their wedding night. The warning that she should never expect his love. What right did he have to care for her now? And even if he wanted to, he couldn't abandon Mary. Not now. Meanwhile, Mary received a piece of news that made her blood boil. The king had spent the night in the queen's chambers, and her hatred for Lishi deepened even more. Wasn't he supposed to be defending me? She thought. Now they're what? Having secret rendezvous. Eyes blazing with jealousy, Mary stormed out. She had to confront the queen right now. Moments later, she barged into the queen's palace, furious. Lishi didn't even flinch. Shouldn't you be in your own quarters reflecting on your actions? You still have the audacity to come here? Mary snapped back, smug and defiant. Reflect? Why should I? The king dotes on me. She sneered. Even as queen, you have to walk on eggshells. That throne doesn't protect you. Lishi simply stared at her. Done with the theatrics. She just wanted this lunatic gone. If you've got something to say, she said flatly, say it now. Mary growled. Were you with the king last night? Lishi raised an eyebrow and answered coldly. Isn't a king being with his queen the normal thing? What's not normal is you. Realizing she couldn't win with words, Mary abruptly changed tactics. Oh? Don't tell me, you've fallen for His Majesty? Lishi smirked, her tone laced with mockery. What's the matter? Afraid I might steal the only scrap of affection you still cling to? The words struck straight into Mary's deepest insecurity. Humiliated and furious, Mary lunged forward, ready to fight. But Sophie, the Queen's knight, stepped in and stopped her cold. Lishi stood tall, her gaze sharp as ice. My patience has limits. Do you need me to remind you, with another round of slaps like yesterday? Shaking with rage but unable to retaliate, Mary could only storm off and slam the door behind her. The next morning, the king arrived to personally bid farewell to the Christian delegation. Courteous exchanges flowed smoothly between both parties. Moments later, Queen Lishi appeared as well. The king blinked in surprise. She came too? Calmly, Lishi spoke. As queen, it is my duty to see off our esteemed guests. But if your majesty finds my presence unpleasant, I'll take my leave. One simple line, and the king was completely speechless. Just then, the Christian ladies approached, graciously thanking Lishi for the splendid banquet she had hosted. Your majesties truly are a perfect match, one said. A couple destined by the heavens, beauty and brilliance combined. The queen responded with a faint smile. The king, however, looked slightly uncomfortable. And from a distance, Mary saw it all, her jaw clenched, fury burning in her eyes. Watching the two of them together, something felt off. No, something was changing. She couldn't explain it, but her gut, her woman's intuition, screamed one thing: the queen was becoming a threat. That day, Nina came to the palace to visit her sister, Lishi. She praised her endlessly for how gracefully she handled the Christian noblewomen. You were amazing, Nina beamed. Truly worthy of the crown. But suddenly Lishi's expression darkened. Nina immediately noticed something was wrong. What is it? Did something happen? Lishi hesitated. She didn't want her sister to worry. Should she really tell her about Mary's attempt to sabotage the banquet? But Nina gently grabbed her hand. We're sisters. What could possibly be too serious to share with me? After hearing the full story, Nina's face paled in disbelief. Has that woman lost her mind? How could she dare to pull something so outrageous? Lishi gave a calm reply. I've already warned her. Next time, she won't get off so easily. As she spoke, a cold glint flashed in her eyes. Sharp, dangerous. Nina stared at her in silence. She had never seen her little sister wear such an expression before. As it turned out, Nina had come to the palace with another purpose. She wanted to stay and become one of Lishi's personal maids. Lishi was stunned. You? But you didn't even want to be a candidate for queen. Why now? Nina looked down, her voice soft. That day, in the garden, I saw the king with Mary. She suddenly collapsed in his arms. Since then I realized, this palace is far more dangerous than we thought. That's why I've made up my mind. I'm staying. I won't leave you alone in a place like this. Soon, Nina began getting familiar with her duties as the queen's attendant. Just then, the ever-energetic knight Sophie burst in with exciting news. There's going to be a royal hunting competition soon, and the prize is 100 million gold coins. She turned to Lishi with a hopeful look. You should enter, Your Majesty. It might boost your standing at court. But Lishi hesitated. Was it worth the risk? Or would it be safer to stay out of it? She turned to her sister for advice. Without pause, Nina replied, You should join. Don't let Mary steal the spotlight again. Besides, very few queens in history ever learned archery. This is your chance to stand out. Meanwhile, Mary had already caught wind of the queen's plan to enter the competition. A cold smile curled on her lips. A new scheme was quietly taking shape in her mind. That day, the queen donned her riding gear, hoping to get in some practice before the tournament. Running her hand along the fabric, she muttered, I haven't worn this in 3 or 4 years. Nina, standing nearby, quickly corrected her. What are you talking about? It's barely been a year. Lishi froze for a split second before hastily correcting herself. Ah, right, I meant it feels like years. She mentally scolded herself. Careful. You almost forgot you're living your second life. She chose a calm, gentle horse and made her way toward the royal forest behind the palace. Alone among the trees, she began practicing mounted archery. After a while, she paused to take a break. But out of nowhere the horse snapped and bit her hand. Blood spilled instantly. Just then a figure emerged in the distance. It was the king. He had heard her cry out. She had only come out here to clear her head. And yet, here he was again. They'd been crossing paths a lot lately, and she was starting to feel like that couldn't be a good sign. The king's eyes immediately caught the sight of the blood on Lixi's hand. Alarmed, he rushed over without hesitation. But Lixi instinctively stepped back, flustered. "It's nothing. Just a small bite," she lied, trying to hide her discomfort. The king frowned. "Nothing? You call that nothing?" Blood was already dripping. How could she pretend it wasn't serious? Without another word, he gently but firmly took her hand in his and began to stop the bleeding. The handkerchief he used was quickly stained red, and that handkerchief was something he held dear. Lixi lowered her gaze and whispered, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'll clean this and return it to you. I promise." Just then a light rain began to fall from the sky. The two of them took shelter under a large tree nearby. The silence between them grew heavy, awkward. They made small talk, neither knowing what else to say. Then the king broke the silence. "That day, when you hosted the Christian guests, did Mary do something to you?" Lixi was caught off guard. "Do you want the comforting version, or the truth?" She told him everything, but when she finished the king said nothing. Not a word. His lack of reaction made her pause. Was he not surprised? Forced into a corner, the king lied, "I only just found out too." Lixi looked him in the eye. "And now that you know, what do you plan to do?" Instead of answering, the king asked, "What do you want me to do?" That made Lixi laugh softly, but there was no warmth in her voice. "If I said I want Mary removed from the palace, would you actually do it?" Back in the palace, the king quietly confronted Mary. "That day, during the Christian banquet, did you do something behind Lixi's back?" He already knew the truth, but some part of him still hoped she hadn't. "You wouldn't risk the kingdom's alliance for something like this, would you?" Mary, ever the actress, put on her most pitiful expression. She still believed the king would never learn the truth, so she kept denying everything. But when she caught the disappointment in his eyes, her heart sank. In a panic, she clutched his hands, her voice trembling. "If it was me, would you leave me? Do you not love me anymore?" She had never seen that look on his face before. Cold. Detached. Desperate, she whispered the nickname only she dared to use. Please, Lucy." And just like that, seeing her break down again, the king's heart softened. He pulled her into his arms, voice low, full of reluctant affection. "You went too far this time, Mary. That if the queen decides to expose this, even I won't be able to protect you." Mary looked up, her gaze wild but steady. "This was the fastest way to become queen, wasn't it?" The king gently patted Mary's hand. "Patience," he said softly. "These things take time. We'll take it step by step." But Mary had no patience left. That's when the king revealed a secret. The queen Lixi was infertile, and Mary had already known. "I can't depose a queen without reason," the king said. "But once the right excuse appears, I'll make it official." Mary clenched her fists. "Wait until they discover she can't bear children. That could take forever." Still, for now, she had no other move. Realizing she couldn't win this battle, Mary quickly softened her tone. Her expression turned sweet, her voice gentle. "I was wrong. I'll behave from now on." The king, seeing her like that, once again gave in and forgave her. But the moment he left, Mary's mask shattered. Her eyes darkened with rage. She muttered through gritted teeth, "This is all that wretched queen's fault." On the day of the royal hunting competition, Mary arrived in full regalia to spectate. From afar, she watched the king and queen standing side by side, receiving praise and admiration from the ministers. Her jaw tightened. Her teeth ground together. She could barely contain her rage. Forcing a smile, she walked over and exchanged a few fake pleasantries with the queen. Suddenly, one of the nearby horses, as if sensing her bad energy, let out a massive sneeze right in her face. Mary froze, her fists clenching at her sides. "Don't lose your temper," she told herself. "Not here. Not today." With a forced, eerie smile, she muttered, "What a beautiful day. Such a perfect day for something unexpected." With the sound of the horn, the royal hunting competition officially began. To give her knight Sophie a fair chance to compete, The queen chose to ride into the forest alone. Bow in hand, she ventured deeper into the woods. By pure chance or fate, she ran into the king once again. But before either of them could speak, a strange rustling echoed from the trees ahead. The king instantly stepped in front of Li Shi, sword hand twitching. "Stay close," he warned. Li Shi whispered, "We're too far from camp. Let's head back." Suddenly the king drew his great sword and swung it, straight at her. Her heart nearly stopped. For a moment she thought he had turned on her. But the blade wasn't meant for her. It slashed an arrow out of midair, one aimed straight for her chest. In the next breath, masked assassins emerged from the shadows, blades drawn. But the king, a warrior hardened by war, moved with deadly precision. Within seconds, every assassin lay dead at his feet. Deep down, Li Shi was thankful. If the king hadn't been there, she'd already be dead. But just as that thought passed, another arrow tore through the air, aimed directly at her. And once again the king moved without hesitation, throwing himself in front of her to take the hit. Li Shi stood frozen, shocked to her core. As she saw him bleeding, barely staying on his feet, panic swelled in her chest. But she clenched her jaw, forcing herself to think. Now wasn't the time to break down. She grabbed the king and dragged him through the woods, searching for an escape. But ahead of them was a sheer cliff. They were trapped. Behind her the king collapsed, unconscious, bleeding. Li Shi turned to the masked assassin, desperation in her voice. "If I'm going to die, at least tell me, who sent you?" The assassin smirked coldly. "Mary. That woman must truly hate you. I've been in this business for years, but I've never seen that much gold just to kill one queen." Li Shi's eyes widened. She had suspected Mary, but she never imagined she'd actually try to kill her. Just before the jump, Li Shi looked back at the white horse that had carried her so far. "Please," she said quietly to the assassin, "spare the horse." The assassin sneered. "Still so kind even with your life on the line? Worried about a damn animal?" But Li Shi didn't answer. She simply pulled the unconscious king into her arms and jumped. She wasn't going to give up. Not without fighting for every last chance to survive. As the wind howled past her ears, she realized it. She should have never shown mercy to Mary. She thought a warning would be enough. But how could a rabid dog change its nature? She was kind, restrained. But had Mary ever shown her the same in return? By some miracle they survived the fall. And in that moment Li Shi finally understood her place. If she kept holding back, death would return for her again. No more high morals. No more mercy. If she didn't fight, Mary would kill her without hesitation. Because in this world of predators and prey, only the one who survives earns the right to rule. Thinking fast, Li Shi tore off the king's bloodied outer cloak and tossed it into the river. If the assassins saw it downstream, maybe they'd think the bodies had washed away and stopped chasing. But right now they had to get moving, and the king was still unconscious. That's when she realized he wasn't just wounded, that he had been poisoned. Thankfully, the arrow had already been removed, but if the poison spread any further, he wouldn't survive. Without hesitation, Li Shi lowered her head and began sucking the poisoned blood from his wound. She didn't care about the risk. But deep down she knew this wasn't enough. They needed an antidote. Then she remembered Sophie. Sophie had mentioned keeping antidotes in case Li Shi got hurt. But those were in the saddlebag and the horse had already bolted. Li Shi gritted her teeth. No time for panic. If they wanted to live, it was all on her now. She had to make it back to the palace within 2 days. Any longer and the nobles would start moving. They'd push for a new king, someone who served their interests. And Li Shi would not let that happen. After making sure the king was safely hidden, Li Shi forced herself back onto her feet to search for the antidote. But the poison in her own body had already begun to spread. Her limbs were weak, her vision blurred. Just as her legs were about to give out, she heard it, the sound of galloping hooves. Her heart froze. No, they found us already. She turned, trying to run back to the king, but collapsed to the ground in the dirt. "It's just the poison," she whispered. "Just a hallucination. I can't die here. I won't die here." But the hoofbeats only grew louder, closer. She looked up, bracing for the worst, and gasped that it was her white horse. Tears welled in her eyes. She wrapped her arms around its neck, trembling. "You're alive. You came back." After catching her breath, Li Shi quickly returned to the king's side to treat his wounds. But as she held the vial of antidote in her hand, a new problem hit her. How do I get it into his mouth when he's unconscious? Her heart pounded as she'd just escaped death by a thread. There was no time for hesitation. If I want to save him, I'll have to do it mouth to mouth. She leaned in slowly, but just before their lips touched, her mind flashed back. To that moment, he stepped in front of her. Took an arrow. Saved her life. Why? Was it just his chivalrous instinct as a king? Or had something changed? Had he finally realized that she was his wife, the queen he should have protected from the start? Her thoughts swirled. So many questions, no answers. Why did he save me? By morning, the king finally opened his eyes. After checking his wounds, Lishi helped him onto the horse. They began their journey back to the palace. Along the way, Lishi told him everything, every detail of what had happened while he was unconscious. Then she turned to him, calm but firm. Your Majesty, do you really not know who sent those assassins? The king looked down. He knew. Of course he knew, but he still couldn't bring himself to say her name. Lishi continued, I understand. What you and Mary have isn't just love, and I promised I wouldn't interfere. But now that she struck first, I have no choice but to fight back. The king remained silent, but Lishi could see it. He was hurting. And yet her voice stayed cold. This time I won't let it go. If Mary isn't the one to die, then it'll be me and my entire family. Just as they approached the palace gates, the king suddenly collapsed, falling from his horse. Lishi's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she urged her horse forward, racing him back to the palace for help. Meanwhile, Mary, waiting anxiously at the gates, was hit with a devastating truth. The assassination had failed. And even more shocking, it was the king who was wounded. Her eyes widened in disbelief. But the assassin brought back the queen's bloodied cloak, she whispered. That's when Lishi arrived, her eyes locked straight on Mary. She dismounted, voice cold. Mary, what are you doing here? Mary instantly put on her well-rehearsed concern. I heard His Majesty had returned. I came to welcome him back. Lishi scoffed. Welcome? No, you just wanted to see if I was dead. Mary froze, caught off guard for a second. Her mask slipped. Why, Your Majesty? What a strange joke to make. Standing before the palace gates, Lishi addressed the gathered nobles and citizens, recounting everything that had happened. When His Majesty and I were pushed to the brink of death, the assassin believed we wouldn't survive, and confessed the identity of their employer, the king's consort. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The nobles were visibly shaken, exchanging stunned glances. But Lishi's voice cut through the noise like steel. With His Majesty unconscious by royal law, the authority to govern now falls to me, Lishi, queen of this realm. She turned to Duke Rennie, her tone sharp and commanding. Duke, tell me, what is the punishment for attempting to assassinate the king and queen? Mary stood frozen among the onlookers, panic rising in her chest. No. They told her. The assassins confessed. Duke Rennie didn't hesitate. By law, any who attempt to harm the king or royal family regardless of rank, are to be executed publicly. A faint smile flickered in Lishi's eyes. That punishment suited her perfectly. But she knew the truth. Executing Mary wouldn't be easy. She had no solid proof. Only she and the unconscious king knew what really happened. And to everyone else, it would seem like nothing more than a jealous queen lashing out. So she took the first step. Mary is to be arrested immediately, she ordered. Let the truth come later. But right now, I won't give her a single chance to destroy the evidence. Back in the royal chambers, Nina took one look at her sister's battered appearance, and her heart ached with worry. But she didn't ask a single question. She simply said, "You should rest," and quietly left. Yet the moment she stepped outside the door, her knees gave out. She collapsed against the wall, tears silently streaming down her face. The next morning, Queen Lishi officially stepped in to handle the affairs of the kingdom in the king's stead. She was greeted by the kingdom's 3 chief ministers, the royal triumvirate entrusted with balancing state power. Their nation's founders had long understood, power corrupts. And so they had built a system of 3 ministers, each checking the others, to prevent tyranny, even from the king himself. It was undeniably a wise design. After the meeting, Lishi's knight Sophie arrived in haste. Her face was heavy with guilt. "Your Majesty, the ambush during the hunt, it was my fault. I should have never let you go alone. But Li Shi simply smiled and shook her head. It wasn't your fault. Don't carry the blame. After everything that had happened, Sophie finally realized. The queen's life was surrounded by danger at every turn. In her heart she made a silent vow. No matter what came next, she would never again let Her Majesty face danger alone. Even if it cost her life, she would protect her. That evening the queen turned to her, her eyes cold and resolute. Sophie, I need your help that I'm going to uncover the truth, and I will personally expose Mary's crimes. She wouldn't rely on others this time. She would investigate herself. Step by step, Li Shi descended the cold stone stairs into the dungeon. Her mind flashed back to the day she had warned Mary. Was I too merciful? Is that why she ignored my threats? Perhaps mercy had its place, in a different time. But now she finally understood. Mercy in times like these was nothing but a foolish luxury. When questioned by the queen, Mary kept her innocent act, eyes wide and voice trembling. I didn't do anything. I swear I'm innocent. She knew exactly what she was doing. Even if the queen suspected her, without solid proof she couldn't be convicted. As long as she kept denying everything, there was nothing Li Shi could legally do. But then the queen leaned in, voice calm and cold. And what if someone already confessed? Mary's face twitched. A flicker of panic broke through her calm. She suddenly remembered. Her personal maid was locked in the next cell. Mary snapped. Are you trying to force a confession, Your Majesty? Li Shi smirked darkly. Oh, I don't need to force anything. I just have to solve this before His Majesty wakes up. And when he does, the woman who tried to kill him will already be dead. Even if she was innocent, he'd never know. But Mary didn't flinch. She raised her chin defiantly. I'm already in a cell. What more can you do to me? Then she added with venom, you're just jealous, aren't you? The king favors me, and now that he's unconscious, you're using it as an excuse to eliminate me. She didn't even finish her sentence. Slap? Li Shi's hand flew across her face. Watch your mouth, the queen snapped. You're a prisoner and you think you can talk back to me? Getting nothing useful from Mary, Li Shi stormed out of the dungeon, frustration boiling. Her mind kept circling one question. Because of Mary's actions, the king was still unconscious. Did she even feel guilty? Did she ever truly love him? But there was another problem brewing. Among the king's 3 chief ministers, Duke Rennie had become increasingly oppositional. During court, when Li Shi declared that Mary's crimes would be thoroughly investigated, Rennie stood and calmly asked, and if Lady Mary turns out to be innocent, Your Majesty, what then? The question sent a chill down Li Shi's spine. Now she was certain. Duke Rennie wasn't just doubtful that he was involved. She stared him down, her voice sharp as steel. So you think I would harm the king, my husband, just to get rid of a royal consort? Or worse, are you suggesting I'm the mastermind? The court went dead silent. Rennie said nothing. He couldn't. After the court meeting, Li Shi made her way to the king's chamber. She stood beside his bed, gazing at his pale, unconscious face. He looked thinner. Too much had changed in just a few days. She still couldn't understand that as king, he knew the weight of his duty. Then why had he thrown himself in front of that arrow for her? Suddenly the king stirred. His brows furrowed. He looked as if trapped in a nightmare. The sight brought back memories of that night in the cave. He had looked the same then, haunted. What kind of nightmare could keep him trapped this long? The next morning, Sophie requested an urgent audience. Li Shi had been growing anxious in her silence. Now that she had returned, Li Shi braced for answers. But Sophie's face was grim. Your Majesty, I failed you. Please forgive me. The day you and His Majesty were attacked, I found several burned bodies in the forest. But when I returned to examine the site again, everything was gone. The bodies, the signs, all vanished, like nothing had ever happened. Li Shi frowned deeply. How could the assassins even enter the hunting grounds? The only access is through the central arena. Sophie nodded. I found a hidden passageway in the woods that it had been well concealed. I believe they used it to enter, and to dispose of the bodies. That's how they destroyed the evidence so easily. Li Shi's eyes narrowed. But that tunnel, even you had to search hard to find it. How could Mary have known about it? Sophie shook her head. I don't think she acted alone. Li Shi fell silent. This wasn't just about Mary anymore. This was something far deeper. For days, the queen had relentlessly pursued the investigation, combing through details, questioning every lead. Yet still, no solid evidence. And the nobles? All they offered were troubled expressions and evasive glances. Throughout the entire council meeting, Lishi stood alone in her resolve to expose Mary. Then a single voice chilled the room. Duke Rennie, the man who had opposed her at every turn. Your Majesty, he said calmly, are you not being a bit obsessive? Why focus solely on Lady Mary? Why not consider questioning someone else? That was it. Another subtle defense. Another calculated jab. Lishi's suspicion deepened. This wasn't mere politics. There was something more between Rennie and Mary. Meanwhile, the annual founding day was approaching. A grand event the palace hosted every year. With preparations piling up, Lishi realized she couldn't manage it all alone. She appealed to the council for support. Just as she expected silence, Duke Rennie stepped forward. If Her Majesty is willing, I would be honored to assist with the festivities. Lishi was stunned at he, of all people, always opposing her and now, offering help. What is he planning? Why now? Suddenly, a palace guard rushed in with urgent news. Duke Rennie's expression turned tense. Had Mary confessed? But when the guard announced, His Majesty has awakened, Rennie exhaled quietly, his nerves easing. Lishi didn't wait a second, she rushed to the king's bedchamber. When she saw his pale, gaunt face, her heart clenched with a strange ache. She stood at his bedside, unsure of what to say. Should she reassure him that the kingdom was stable, or tell him the truth, that the assassin hadn't been caught? But then the king spoke first. You've lost weight, he murmured. Thank you, for everything. That was it. Those simple words pierced something deep in Lishi. Her emotions, buried and suppressed for days, came crashing to the surface. It felt like something inside her had quietly shifted, and she didn't know when or how. She finally blurted out, You were reckless. You're the king. How could you throw yourself in front of an arrow like that? Did you even think of the consequences? The king stared at her, completely baffled. I took that arrow for you, and you're angry at me? Their voices rose, back and forth, frustration mounting. The king looked genuinely hurt. How could you yell at the man who saved your life? Because I was worried about you, she snapped. That silenced them both. Lishi froze, because even she didn't understand why she was really angry. After a long pause, the king finally broke the silence. Did you catch the one responsible? And then, though he already knew the answer, he asked anyway, Is Mary among the suspects? Deep down, he wanted to stop Lishi from punishing Mary. But as king, he knew all too well. True power had limits. Too many eyes were watching, and this time Mary would not escape punishment. Lishi's expression remained cold, but in her mind an image resurfaced. Her sister's final moments, bloody, broken, betrayed. Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Then tell me, can I sentence Mary to death? The king flinched, like he'd been struck across the chest. He lowered his head, voice filled with desperation. Please, spare her. But Lishi only scoffed. She conspired to kill the king. Even your favorite consort cannot be exempt. I'm not saying you can't punish her, he said quickly. You can make her disappear. Just don't make her die officially. Please. She means a lot to me. Lishi let out a bitter laugh. How touching. Your love for her is truly moving. But inside she wondered, even if I agree to that, would someone like Mary ever accept being a dead woman walking? After leaving the king's chamber, Lishi made her way toward her study. But she was stopped by a sudden request. Duke Vit sought an urgent audience. With a calm, almost careless tone, he said, You know, guilt can be manufactured. Especially in cases like this. Hard to pin down, yes, but not impossible to orchestrate. Lishi knew well. The Vit and Rennie houses had been rivals for generations. Still, she couldn't quite understand why Vit had chosen now to side with her. In her previous life, Lady Rennie and Mary had conspired to carry out a cruel scheme, but the timeline didn't match this assassination. Which left one glaring question. What exactly is the connection between Mary and Duke Rennie? Vit answered simply, a man like Rennie? He'll ally with whoever helps him keep his power. And judging by the way he's been treating you lately, he's clearly made his choice. He's backing Mary. Lishi frowned. All because she's the king's favored consort? Vit gave a dry laugh. Your Majesty, if you think affection is the same as leverage, then you've already lost. Mary knows how to use power. We, on the other hand, the best we can do is strip her of her title. That evening, under the soft flicker of palace lanterns, Nina quietly entered Lishi's chambers. Seeing the weariness etched into her sister's face, she asked gently, "How did it go with Duke Vit today?" As Lishi spoke, Nina nodded. "I understand the idea of manufacturing charges. I don't want this to be swept under the rug either." But that struck a nerve. Lishi's mask cracked and her voice rose. "I warned Mary. If we just let this go, I'll become the joke of the entire court." Nina froze. The woman standing before her looked so different, harder, sharper. But she didn't know. Lishi was only pretending to be strong, just so her sister wouldn't have to carry the guilt. "So, you think I've become cruel?" Lishi asked quietly, her voice trembling. Nina's eyes widened. "No. I'm glad you've changed. You're stronger now. You can protect yourself." That was it. Lishi broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You always knew me best, but I hate what I've become." Nina's heart ached. She blamed herself. Her little sister, once like a wildflower in full bloom, was now trapped in thorns, forced to grow in pain. And still, Lishi pressed on, refusing to wilt, determined to survive. To bloom again. If only Nina had entered the palace in her place, maybe Lishi wouldn't have had to change. And now Nina understood. She was the one who had pushed her sister off the edge. Today was the day. The investigation would finally conclude. On the way to the court, the king cautiously asked Lishi, "Are you really going to sentence Mary to death?" Lishi nodded without hesitation. The king froze, like a helpless child, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the grand hall, Duke Vit had already arranged everything. The false evidence was ready and in place. The officials all stood silent, awaiting the king's command. Lishi held her breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. But then, Duke Rennie burst into the chamber, his voice echoing across the hall. "Your Majesty, the evidence you're relying on, it's all fake. I found the real culprit." As it turned out, Rennie and Mary had predicted this exact outcome. Long ago they had planted a scapegoat ready to be sacrificed at the perfect time, to clear Mary's name completely. With both witnesses contradicting each other, the king had no choice but to order a second investigation. But no matter how deep they dug, they found nothing, because the truth was, there was never any evidence to begin with. To attempt murder against the king and queen, that was treason. A crime that would see not just one but entire bloodlines destroyed. And without solid proof, any wrong judgment could ignite a political catastrophe. From the start, this case was never meant to be resolved. In the end, all the king did was revoke Mary's baroness title, a symbolic slap on the wrist. Lishi couldn't understand it. Why did Duke Rennie choose Mary? No matter how favored she was, Mary was still the daughter of low nobility. And Rennie, a duke born of pure lineage, should have cared more than anyone about bloodlines. But in the end, Mary walked free, and the one who lost the most was the queen herself. All she could do was accept it. Meanwhile, Mary, freshly released from prison, showed not a shred of remorse. She scoffed, blaming everything on the idiot assassin. "Next time," she sneered, "I'll hire someone better." Her maid had assumed that this ordeal would humble her. But Mary only grinned and whispered, "Fetch Duke Rennie. I want a word with him." The next day, Duke Rennie arrived at her quarters as requested. Mary sat poised, her expression unreadable. "After everything that's happened," she began, "I finally realized something. In this world it's not love, not beauty, but titles that hold real power." Rennie's eyes narrowed. Something about her tone, it made him uneasy. But Mary leaned in, voice sweet and venomous. "Tell me, Duke, wouldn't you like to be the king's father-in-law? How about adopting me as your daughter?" Rennie paused, visibly unsettled by the proposal. Mary's smile vanished, her voice turned cold. "Or would you rather His Majesty learn about all your little secrets from me?" As it turned out, Mary really did have something on Duke Rennie. That single piece of leverage was what had let her climb so fast, landing right beside the king. Terrified of exposure, Rennie had no choice but to agree to her outrageous demand. But even his agreement wasn't enough. For in their kingdom, Adoption required approval from the biological parents. Mary's mother was already dead. That left only her father's signature. With a chilling sneer, Mary hissed, "If he dares get in my way, then he's nothing but irredeemable trash." Just days before, Rennie had received an anonymous letter that it said only one sentence. "I'm the only one who knows what happened 8 years ago." And it was enough to make Rennie's blood run cold. Enraged, he stormed into Mary's chambers. "You, a baron's daughter, and you dare threaten me?" Mary's smile curled darkly. "Every sin leaves a trace, and if you wanted to stay clean, you shouldn't have gotten dirty." Then came the final blow. "You have two options, my dear Duke. Be ruined, or help me become queen." That day Mary came to the king with her usual charm, throwing herself into his arms and pouting, "Your Majesty, why haven't you come to see me?" Then she said it outright. She was heading back to her homeland, to visit her father. Alarmed, the king asked quickly, "Did your father do something to you?" Mary shook her head, smiling sweetly. "No, silly. Duke Rennie has adopted me. I'm no longer just a baron's daughter." The king blinked in surprise, taken completely off guard. But Mary didn't stop. Her voice grew soft and sorrowful. "That whole nightmare last time, I nearly lost my head. Just because of my low birth. The queen humiliated me. If not for Duke Rennie, I'd be dead." And the king, he couldn't bring himself to question her. He'd always believed Mary was different. She wasn't like the others, she was pure. To him, Mary was the sun, the air, the water, the very reason he still breathed. Even if it was all a lie, even if she betrayed him, he didn't want to let her go. But now, for the first time, he began to wonder if he'd been wrong. Meanwhile, Nina, acting on Lishi's request, paid a visit to Duchess Rennie. At first, the Duchess held her chin high, noble and proud, barely hiding her disdain. But the moment she heard Nina's words, she burst into tears, breaking down completely. You see, the queen had already learned. The Duchess's only son living abroad had fallen gravely ill. Through Nina, Lishi sent her sincerest condolences, and a message, "If there's anything I can do, please let me help." That simple kindness shattered the Duchess's defenses. Choking on her tears, she confessed she had to go see her son. But the moment she left, there would be no one to oversee the estate. And that worried her even more. Because her husband, Duke Rennie, also had a concubine, and that woman had already given him a 2-year-old son. If she left now, who knew what schemes that woman might unleash in her absence? The Duchess was known for her pride, never one to speak of her private troubles. So when she bared her soul so openly, Nina was genuinely surprised. But she also knew, this was her moment. "I understand completely," Nina said softly. "My sister, the queen, has faced the exact same pain you're feeling now." As she spoke, tears welled in her eyes, and she let 2 perfect drops fall. It was deliberate. Every word, every gesture, calculated with care. After a long silence, the Duchess finally sighed. "Nina, while I'm away, would you be willing to oversee the household in my place?" When news spread that Nina had agreed to help the Duchess manage household affairs, Lishi was furious. She nearly smashed her teacup. She couldn't understand it at all. The Duke of Rennie was their enemy. How could her sister side with him? Nina could have just offered some polite words of comfort and walked away. Why would she go so far as to make such a decision on her own? Nina quickly explained that she had a plan. She agreed only to infiltrate the enemy from within. The Rennie estate was the heart of their political rivals, and now she had the chance to manage it from the inside. As the designated lady of the house, she alone had that authority. Even the Duke couldn't overrule her. So Nina was willing to become a spy, all to ease Lishia's burden and uncover why the Duke still refused to name a queen. Hearing this, Lishia was overwhelmed with emotion. She had completely misunderstood Nina's intentions. The truth was, Lishia had become overly sensitive. Ever since that night, she hadn't had a single restful sleep. Every night she dreamed of arrows flying straight at her. As long as Marie was still alive, even the slightest mistake could mean ruin. Not just for her but for Nina and their entire family. Seeing the weary look on Lishia's face, Nina's heart ached. She hated that she couldn't shoulder more of the burden for her. Though His Majesty had suffered greatly from the incident, it was Lishia who bore the deepest psychological wounds. Meanwhile, Mary had finished packing her bags and was bidding a reluctant farewell to the king. The journey to Baron Delors' territory was long. It would take 2 to 3 weeks for a round trip. Watching Mary leave, the queen couldn't help but feel a bit of joy. At last, a break from this tiresome girl. It only proved how much mental strain Mary had caused her. The queen had hoped for a peaceful night's sleep in Mary's absence. But instead she was startled awake by the sound of someone sobbing. Yet when she summoned her maid, the girl claimed she heard nothing. Was the sound only audible to her? Lately, the queen had been far too sensitive. Even the slightest noise was enough to wake her. Unable to sleep, she decided to get up and investigate. Who could be crying in the palace at this hour? The voice sounded like a desperate plea, hoarse and broken. So indistinct it was impossible to tell whether it belonged to a man or woman. But whoever it was, their grief was unmistakable. Just as she drew closer to the source, she ran into the king's personal maid. When the queen tried to pass, the maid blocked her path. The queen frowned, displeased. She was the queen after all. Who was this maid to tell her where she could or couldn't go? The queen couldn't help but grow suspicious. The maid seemed to be deliberately blocking her path. She questioned her sharply. "Why are you here? Did His Majesty send you?" Before the maid could respond, a gut-wrenching scream echoed from within the room. The queen's heart clenched. There was definitely a secret being hidden inside. Ignoring the maid's attempts to stop her, she pressed forward. The closer she got, the louder the cries became, laced with desperation, growing more piercing with each step. Her worst suspicions felt increasingly confirmed. Just as she reached the doorway, she spotted the king's secretary and several other maids nearby. That was all the confirmation she needed. The person inside had to be the king. She ordered Sophie and the others to wait outside. She thought she was mentally prepared, but the moment she opened the door, she was completely stunned. The room was in utter disarray, and in the corner, His Majesty was curled up in agony like a wounded beast. Could he be mentally ill? He always seemed so composed in public. How could anyone explain what she was seeing now? Veins bulged on his forehead, his eyes were bloodshot, breath ragged, and his cheeks were streaked with dried tears. Who would have imagined that the king of the Naz Empire, the man once seen as radiant as the sun, was now howling like a madman, wild and broken beyond recognition? Seeing His Majesty in such a broken state, the queen felt her mind go numb. Her heart ached so deeply that tears streamed down her cheeks. She couldn't fathom what kind of pain a king, an emperor, had to endure to fall this far. Just as she reached out to offer comfort, the king suddenly pulled her into his arms, clutching her tightly. The queen froze, unsure of what to do. All she could manage was to gently pat his back, hoping it would calm him somehow. She didn't know why, but in that moment she found herself feeling sorry for him. He looked so helpless, so broken. All she wanted was to soothe this tragic, sorrowful soul. Over an hour passed before the king's emotions began to settle. The queen, sensing he might feel embarrassed, quietly tried to get up and leave. But just as she moved, the king reached out and grabbed the edge of her gown, his voice trembling. "Please, don't go." She stood still, stunned. Wasn't he the one who never liked her? Before she could even finish the thought, the king cut her off with urgency. "I like you. I do. Please, stay." But the queen didn't believe a word of it. She stared at him coldly, thinking, this had to be just another lie, a trick to make her stay. Still, the queen couldn't help but wonder, how could someone fall apart so completely, so suddenly? What had happened to him? The king's lips were sealed tight. Would she ever learn the truth? The more she thought about it, the more restless she became. At that moment, all she wanted was to return to her own chambers. But the king clung to the hem of her gown like a child, refusing to let go. Left with no choice, the queen stayed. Yet he remained silent, not saying a single word. Time passed, and the exhaustion of the past few days finally caught up with her. Somehow, next to the king, she drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, when Sophie and Maria saw the king step out of the room, they were visibly shocked. The queen was still fast asleep inside. From that day on, she never spoke of that night again. Even the king's personal maid solemnly asked them to keep it a secret, though they hadn't seen or heard a thing. Sophie couldn't help but be curious. What exactly had happened that night? Just then, Nina happened to pass by and overheard Sophie and Maria whispering. She paused and asked, "What's going on?" After all, she hadn't been in the palace that day. Sophie then recounted everything in detail, what had happened that night, and how the king's maid had solemnly asked them to keep it a secret. Could this really affect His Majesty's authority? She wondered aloud. But Nina didn't seem particularly shocked by the story, which only made Sophie more suspicious. Wait, do you already know something? She asked urgently. Nina gave a faint smile and replied casually, how could I know anything? I just find it strange, that's all. I mean, the king's PR team must be brilliant. That night could have caused a huge scandal, and yet, everything in the palace remained calm and quiet. Like nothing ever happened at all. That night, unable to sleep, the queen took a solitary walk by the river. She hadn't expected to run into the king again, but there he was. She gave him a polite nod and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Are you avoiding me? The king asked gently, as if afraid of the answer. The queen froze, unsure what to say. After a moment she replied hurriedly, what happened that night? It damaged your image. I assumed you wouldn't want to see me again. Queen, the king said calmly, are you trying to guess what I think? Under the pale moonlight, their words became a careful dance, each sentence laced with caution and hidden emotion. After a long pause, the king asked quietly, when you saw me like that, were you afraid? The queen didn't lie. She nodded and said softly, yes. I was. The king said nothing, his silence weighing heavier than words. The queen longed to know the truth, but knowing his nature, she doubted he would say anything at all. She couldn't help but wonder, what was she to him really? Why would he share his secrets with someone like her? Perhaps she'd only been fooling herself to hope for more. Finally, after what felt like forever, the king muttered, you wouldn't understand. Swallowing her frustration, the queen looked at him and said, I'm not a mind reader. If you won't tell me, I'll never understand. But if you do, well, listen, I'll try to understand, because at the very least we can try to become something more. Can't we? It was the queen's quiet, sincere words that finally reached the king's heart. In the darkness she could just make out the faint redness around his eyes. Was he crying? At last he found the strength to speak about the past he had hidden for so long. His first words froze her in place. I used to be a killer. It all began with his mother, Queen Ellie. She was born into the empire's most prestigious noble house, the daughter of the Duke of Oswin. Everyone praised her as elegant, noble, and endlessly kind. She was also the beloved and dazzling queen of the Naz Empire. But from the moment little Lucy was born, it felt like misfortune clung to him more than anyone else. His mother, cold and distant, never once showed warmth. The nightmare truly began 10 years ago on his 15th birthday. He had approached the day like any other, unaware that his entire life was about to change. That day his mother summoned him. With a heart full of cautious joy, he went to her, wondering if, just maybe, she had prepared a birthday gift. He was still a child, too young to realize what truly awaited him. Today is your birthday, she said with a gentle smile, a softness so unfamiliar it caught him off guard. He froze in disbelief. She remembered, and she had a gift for him? It was the first, and only, time he had ever received something from her. He held her hand for the very first time, heart soaring with anticipation. In that moment he felt like maybe she did love him, even just a little. He wanted to ask what the gift was, but he didn't dare. He was afraid that if he spoke, the warmth of that fleeting moment would disappear. And so Lucy held his mother's hand and followed her into the courtyard, his heart full of hope. But instead of a gift or celebration, he found a woman sitting there with her head covered in a white cloth. That was the gift his mother had prepared for him. With a gentle smile she told him, she's the one you're going to kill today. Lucy froze in place, cold sweat running down his back. He was just a boy, he had no idea what was happening. His mother knelt beside him, stroking his hair gently. If you kill her, she whispered sweetly, I'll be so proud of you. Would you do that for me, Lucy? Just this once. Her expression was soft, elegant, almost loving. The same look she only ever showed when she was with the emperor. He wanted to make her happy. He really did. But his hands trembled, and he couldn't. He just couldn't. Her face changed instantly. Like a demon unmasked, she snarled, You dare defy me? Filthy little thing. What a wicked, disobedient child you are. The words pierced through his chest like a blade. Weren't mothers supposed to love their children? Why did it feel like she hated him? Was he not really her son? But then he told himself maybe it was just because he was a bad kid. Maybe he didn't deserve her love. When she raised her hand again, preparing to beat him once more, he still clung to a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, since it was his birthday, today would be different. But he had hoped for too much. The whip came down hard over and over again. Pain erased everything else. Right and wrong blurred into nothing. In the face of such violence, even a child's sense of morality begins to break. At that moment, all Lucy wanted was to survive. He begged his mother to spare him, his voice shaking with fear. But she remained unmoved, her tone still gentle. If you don't want to be beaten anymore, then kill her. She handed him a cold, gleaming knife. Lucy was in so much pain, both physical and emotional, that survival was the only thing he could think about. He trembled uncontrollably. If he didn't do it, she would keep beating him. He was just a child, his body and mind could take no more. With shaking hands, Lucy unsheathed the blade and stabbed the woman without hesitation. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry." But even as he begged for forgiveness, he hoped she wouldn't give it, because he didn't believe he deserved it. The woman made no effort to fight back. Instead, she gently caressed Lucy's cheek, then collapsed into a pool of blood. His mother clapped her hands in satisfaction, pride gleaming in her eyes. "Well done, Lucy. Now, take a look at her face." The command was cruel beyond words. But before he could move, she leaned in and sneered, "Do you know who she is?" Then came the truth. A truth that shattered everything. "You're not my real son," she said coldly. "That woman you just killed, she was your real mother." And with a wicked grin she added, "You're the one who killed her." The words hit Lucy like a bolt of lightning. His knees gave out. He had killed his own mother, with his own hands. At that age, the weight of such horror was unbearable. From that day on, his soul was never whole again. Since then, the nightmares never stopped. Night after night, he would see himself murdering his mother all over again, with his own filthy hands. The blood never washed away. And every year on the anniversary of her death, the guilt grew even heavier. He was sure she looked down on him with condemnation, seeing him as selfish, cowardly, unclean. And whenever those thoughts consumed him, he would curl into himself and whisper, "I'm a monster, a true monster." The queen couldn't hold back her tears. They streamed down her face uncontrollably. She simply couldn't understand. How could someone speak so calmly after enduring something so cruel? The king looked at her in confusion. "Why are you crying?" he asked softly. After that incident, no one offered him comfort or sympathy. Instead, he was met with mockery and scorn. People said he had committed the ultimate betrayal, killing to save himself. Even his personal maids avoided him. To everyone around him, the king was nothing more than a monster. The queen looked at him, her heart aching. What he went through was something no adult could bear, let alone a child. He had been just a boy. Before he could ever speak about it, how many tears had he already cried in secret? How many times had he blamed and hurt himself? How deep must that pain go? She was merely a bystander, yet even she felt crushed by the weight of his past. But the king, he had no tears left to shed. Overwhelmed, the queen sank to the ground, sobbing. The king stared at her, puzzled. "Doesn't she hate me?" he wondered. The queen didn't even know the answer herself. All she knew was that in that moment he wasn't a king, he was just a deeply wounded soul. The king's heart filled with confusion. No one had ever cried for him. No one had ever told him it was okay to cry. Not even Mary, the one he thought he loved, had allowed him to show his tears. She only taught him to bury them and to bury the past. And yet the queen, someone he had once hurt, was the first person to weep for him, and the only one to say, "It's okay to cry." In that quiet moment, wrapped in her understanding, the king finally broke down. For the first time in years, he let the tears fall, soft, childlike sobs that had been trapped inside him far too long. Meanwhile, Mary had arrived at her father's house. He looked at her, confused, unable to understand why she was doing this. But Mary cut him off coldly, "Just shut your mouth and sign the damn papers." Her stepmother, standing off to the side, immediately put on a fake show of tears. "Mary, how could you say something so heartless?" she sobbed. That was the last straw. Mary snapped. "I don't want to carry this cursed last name for another second," she shouted. "Sign the agreement, while I'm still willing to speak civilly." She glared at the two of them, her heart burning with rage. A part of her wanted to tear them apart in the most brutal way imaginable. But she didn't. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer wanted anything to do with them. As she turned to leave, her father called after her, voice trembling, "Can't you stay, just for one night? This might be our last moment, as father and daughter." Father and daughter. Mary repeated, disgusted. She shot him a glare. "Have you ever treated me like your daughter? Even for a single second?" Why did the king care for Mary so deeply? Because like him, she had endured a childhood full of darkness and scars. Their pain was different, but the loneliness was the same, and it quietly connected them. Mary was born after her mother spent a single night with Baron Deller. As a child, she knew nothing of the world's cruelty. In those early years, she even felt a fleeting sense of happiness, but it didn't last. When the Baroness discovered the existence of Mary's mother, she was consumed by jealousy and rage. Blinded by pride, she murdered the woman with her own hands. Mary's biological father, the Baron, stood by and did nothing. After that day, Mary was taken into the Baron's mansion, forced to live among the very people who destroyed her world. She was only 10 years old, yet she spent the next few years trapped in a life of fear and humiliation. As she grew older, she began to notice the way her half-brother looked at her, with eyes full of twisted desire. And eventually the nightmare happened. Her brother did the unthinkable. He crossed a line that could never be undone. In that moment of despair, Mary saw the Baroness through the crack of a door. She begged for help with her eyes, but the Baroness simply watched, unmoved. Maybe she didn't want to face the truth about her son. Maybe she never saw Mary as human to begin with. In the end, she chose silence. From that day on, Mary was no longer the same. The innocent girl inside her died. And in her place grew a cold, unshakable resolve. One day she would make the Baron's family pay for everything they had done. The next morning, Mary coldly demanded her father hand over the signed agreement. But to her disgust, she realized he had asked her to stay the night with ulterior motives. With a twisted grin, he said, "Raising you all these years wasn't cheap, you know. Don't you think it's time you paid us back?" Mary had already expected this kind of shamelessness, but she hadn't thought it would take only a bit of money to finally sever ties with such a disgusting past. The moment they saw the money, the Baron and his wife dropped the act completely, revealing their true, greedy faces. Staring at them, Mary made herself a silent promise. "You'd better stay alive, because when I become queen, I'll destroy you both. And I want you to be there to witness it." Meanwhile, the queen found her thoughts drifting back to the conversation she had with the king the night before. If she hadn't learned the truth, she might have still clung to her anger, using ignorance as an excuse to hate him. But now, she couldn't bring herself to treat him with the same coldness. She had asked him, "Did you fall in love with Mary, and make her someone special, because you saw your own pain reflected in hers?" When the king nodded without hesitation, the queen's heart sank a little. So this was the answer she had dreaded all along. She had always sensed it. His affection for Mary wasn't just love. It was as if he saw her as an extension of himself. And now she finally understood why it felt so unnatural. The queen looked up, her gaze calm but direct. "Do you love Mary?" she asked softly. The king hesitated, then replied, I'm not sure." That answer didn't surprise the queen. To her, it made sense that the king would feel confused. And as for Mary, she had always doubted whether Mary truly loved him at all. After all, this kind of affection had started from pity. Shared pain might create a bond, but that kind of sympathy doesn't last. If we can't tell the difference between compassion and love, then all we're left with is heartbreak. At the same time, in the quiet of the library, the king found himself dwelling on the queen's question from the night before. "Do you love Mary?" If it had been asked in the past, he would have answered without hesitation, yes. But now he wasn't so sure. He didn't know what his feelings for Mary had become. He admitted to once looking down on her, and now he pitied her. But that pity made him question everything. Was it truly love? And did Mary ever truly love him back? Just then, the queen unexpectedly appeared at the entrance of the library. She hadn't expected to find the king there at this hour. After a few brief, polite words between them, the air quickly grew awkward. The queen considered leaving, but unfortunately, the book she needed was in this very room. As she searched the shelves, her thoughts began to wander. If it had been Mary here instead of her, the king would probably have pretended not to notice her at all. Sure, the king having a mistress wasn't the worst scandal in the world. But suddenly she couldn't help wondering, what if she had met him before Mary did? Would he have chosen her instead? Would she have become his special one? Lost in thought, she suddenly turned her head, only to find the king staring right at her. Startled and flustered, she quickly looked away, her heart skipping a beat. The king, watching her panic, found it oddly endearing. He was just worried she might fall while reaching for the books on such a high shelf. But before he could finish voicing his concern, a heavy book suddenly came loose and tumbled down toward her. Without hesitation, the king shielded her from the falling book. The queen's eyes widened in shock and worry. She immediately called for the maid to fetch a doctor, fearing the king might have been hit in the head. Once the tension settled, the queen sat down and after a moment of silence turned to Maria. "Tell me the story," she said softly, "about the deposed Queen Ellie." It turned out that Ellie's cruelty toward young Lucy had a hidden reason. The deposed Queen Ellie, perhaps once upon a time, truly had been the kind and gentle woman everyone believed she was. But everything changed when the man she loved took a mistress, and even had a child with her. Ellie's world crumbled and the kindness within her began to slowly fade. The darker parts of her soul, long buried, began to surface. She often wondered, if she had a child of her own, would things have been different? But fate had been unkind. She was barren. For a queen, it was nothing short of a death sentence. Without the ability to bear heirs, her value, her status, her very existence, was suddenly deemed meaningless. And yet she couldn't bring herself to leave the man she still loved. So, during a war campaign led by the previous king, she devised a cruel plan. She stole the mistress's child right from her arms. The mistress had sobbed in anguish, but she didn't dare fight back. After all, she was just a low-born woman without a title. She had no power to defy a queen. That night, after learning the truth about the former queen's past, Licia had a nightmare. In it, her former self appeared, silent and cold, reaching out to take her away. But in the next moment the figure changed, and it became Nina. Bloodied and bruised, Nina stood before her. Licia broke down in tears, crying out, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Licia jolted awake from her nightmare so suddenly that she tumbled right out of bed. Hearing the noise, Sophie and Maria rushed in to check on her. Unable to fall back asleep, Licia wandered to the riverside. She had thought those memories were behind her, that she could bear it all on her own now. But clearly she was wrong. Just thinking about it brought tears to her eyes once more. Just then the king appeared. Seeing her crying, he immediately approached, concerned, and gently handed her a handkerchief. Licia brushed it off, saying she had simply remembered something from the past. The king admitted that he too couldn't sleep, plagued by his own nightmares. The two began to talk. The king confessed that whenever he shared his past, most people, whether intentionally or not, would distance themselves from him. Even his own father had done the same. "Sometimes," he said softly, "even well-meaning avoidance can hurt. Sweat. I'm grateful you've always hated me the same way." Licia stared at him and to her surprise, found herself slowly falling. She knew all too well that much of the pain she carried had been caused by this man. He was the one who had destroyed her entire family. And yet she found herself forgiving him. She reminded herself, again and again, that all of that had happened in another life. This version of him had nothing to do with that past. In this life he hadn't harmed her or her family, not yet. But as for the future, who could say what it might hold? The moment Mary returned to the palace, she stormed in and confronted the queen. "Why did you cut the budget for Baron Palace? So what if I lost my Baroness title? I'm still the one His Majesty loves the most." The queen raised an eyebrow, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Please be precise. It's His Majesty's secret lover. The Empire's laws don't mention funding for a woman with no legitimate title." But Mary remained defiant. "Funding me has always been standard practice. Why would you suddenly break tradition and make such a decision on your own?" The queen stood tall and unwavering. "As head of the imperial harem, I have every right to cut unnecessary expenses. And you, just a mere baron's daughter, should consider yourself lucky to have received anything at all." "A mere baron's daughter?" Mary scoffed, her voice laced with disdain. "My biological father has already signed away his parental rights. Soon I'll be adopted into the house of Rennie. She gritted her teeth and warned, "You'd best stop insulting me like this." But the queen didn't so much as flinch. Her voice was cold yet majestic. "I am the highest-ranking woman in this empire. No one outranks me. Tell me, why would I care what you think?" She then narrowed her eyes and snapped, "If you truly intend to become a noble lady, then start acting like one. Try not to disgrace the title you're so desperate to claim." Mary trembled with rage. Realizing she was no match for the queen's words, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her pride in tatters and fury burning in her eyes. But Mary wasted no time running to the king to complain, fully expecting him to take her side as always. What she didn't know was that the king had already started to change. She vented about the queen cutting her budget, hoping for support, but this time, the king didn't defend her. Mary was taken aback. She stared at him, confused. "What's going on with you today?" she asked. The king answered calmly, his tone flat. "This isn't sudden. I've just never said what you are. Our relationship has never been public, so it's best not to be extravagant." Mary was stunned, speechless. Her only choice was to storm out, frustration written all over her face. Had the king finally come to his senses? Back in her chambers, she erupted in fury, yelling at the empty air about how the king could treat her this way. Deep down she knew, his affection for her wasn't what it used to be. Jealousy twisted in her chest. She couldn't shake the suspicion. The king and the queen must have grown closer while she was away. In a fit of rage, she ordered her maid to contact Duke Rennie immediately. The adoption needed to be finalized, she couldn't wait any longer. Meanwhile, Nina had just infiltrated enemy territory in an effort to help her sister Licia. But to her frustration, the very first question thrown at her was already giving her a massive headache. That day, the steward of Duke Rennie's estate sought out Nina. The issue at hand? Lady Yueli, the duke's mistress, had been spending far too much on luxury goods. As they were discussing it, Lady Yueli herself walked in, smiling sweetly. "Is something going on?" she asked casually. The steward didn't even look up. "I don't believe I owe you an explanation," he replied curtly. Nina couldn't help but think to herself, no wonder he was so trusted by the Duchess. This steward was clearly not someone to be trifled with. Realizing the atmosphere had turned cold, Lady Yueli quickly took the hint and excused herself. She knew the Duchess had been working behind the scenes to keep her in check, especially when it came to her reckless spending. That's why the steward had come to Nina. With Nina now managing the estate's affairs, he hoped she could come up with a proper solution. Feeling the pressure, Nina turned to Licia for advice. Everyone knew mistresses and wives never got along. In the end, one of them would have to go, but for now they still knew very little about Lady Yueli's background. Licia thought for a moment, then suggested, "Why don't we ask Lady Yueli to provide a full list of her expenses? We can cross out anything unnecessary and only approve the essentials." The two sisters began to chat casually. Licia mentioned almost offhandedly, "Mary returned to the palace early, and she's now Duke Rennie's adopted daughter." Nina was stunned. She stared at Licia, who was calmly recounting the news, and said firmly, "That can't be right. I need to investigate this myself." The next day, Nina presented her new financial plan to the steward. After hearing her out, he fully agreed with the proposal. Just then Nina feigned embarrassment. "I've had too much tea," she said with a slight laugh. "I need to visit the ladies' room." The steward offered to escort her, but she quickly declined. In truth, Nina had another plan. She slipped away and made her way to Lady Yueli's room. Opening one of the drawers, she began searching intently. But suddenly an image flashed through her mind. A masked figure in black, blade in hand, leaping through the window. Nina froze, her breath catching. Then just as quickly she snapped back to focus. Her eyes scanned the room, until they landed on an envelope tucked away in the corner. Just then Lady Yueli returned. Seeing Nina in her room, she looked genuinely surprised. Nina quickly explained, "I must have gotten lost. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." After a few polite exchanges, Lady Yueli coldly but firmly asked her to leave. Once Nina was gone, Lady Yueli's face shifted into one of panic. Could it be she really was hiding something? That day marked the Empire's founding festival. Still haunted by the previous assassination attempt on the Queen, Sir Sophie vowed not to leave her side for even a second. But the queen waved off his concern, smiling. It's a national celebration. What could possibly go wrong today? She wanted everyone to enjoy themselves. Seeing she wouldn't budge, Sophie reluctantly went off on his own. Soon after, the king arrived at the queen's side, surprised to see her alone. "Where's your escort?" he asked. The queen glanced at him coolly. "No need for concern, your majesty." Then with a hint of jealousy she added, "Shouldn't you be with the duke's darling daughter instead?" She was of course referring to Mary, who just days ago had officially been adopted into Duke Rennie's household. The king scoffed. "Only you would tell your husband to go spend time with his mistress." The queen shot back without missing a beat. "Because I've long given up expecting anything from my husband." Her words hit hard, leaving the king speechless. For once he had no witty retort. The queen felt stifled and decided to get some fresh air. As the king made a move to follow, she stopped him coldly as if reading his mind. "I'd prefer you didn't come with me." The king was left bewildered. Just days ago she'd been warm and open. What had changed so suddenly? Alone in the garden, the queen sat quietly for a while. Just as she was about to leave, she caught the sound of two women speaking in hushed tones. To her shock, one of them was Mary. And the other, was that Lady Yueli? The queen's eyes widened. So they were working together. Lady Yueli, flustered, said, "That letter, it's missing." Mary exploded, "Don't forget we're in this together. If this gets out, it's not just you who's going down. I'm going with you." Unfortunately, the queen was too far away to see clearly or hear the full conversation. Just then the king appeared beside her. Startled, the queen quickly covered his mouth to keep him silent. She whispered angrily, "It's your fault. I missed the rest of what they were saying because of you." The king was completely lost. He had no idea what she was talking about. He'd only come to check on her because she'd been gone for so long. The night breeze turned chilly, and the king gently placed his cloak over the queen's shoulders. But she pulled away almost instantly. With a swift motion, she yanked off the cloak and said coldly, "Have you forgotten what you told me on our wedding night? You said you'd never love me." Yet everything the king had done lately contradicted those very words. Flustered, the king replied, "I'm merely fulfilling my duties as a husband." The queen let out a bitter laugh. "A husband's duty? The most basic duty is loyalty and harmony between spouses. But you've failed at both, your majesty." Even if the king were to beg her now, she wouldn't waver. She had finally made up her mind. Before leaving, she reminded him of their agreement. "All I want is a legitimate heir. A crown prince born of me. Nothing more." For the first time she voiced the truth she had buried for years. She would no longer cling to the illusion of love, no matter how small the ember. Yet strangely, after saying all that, her heart ached. As if something precious had been lost. Meanwhile, Nina sat alone at a tavern, quietly sipping her drink. Just then, a man accidentally spilled wine on her. He recognized her immediately. They had met once before. He apologized politely, introducing himself as Rossi. But Nina wasn't in the mood for conversation. She brushed it off with a quiet, "It's fine," and turned to leave. Rossi called out to Nina just as she turned to leave, hoping to exchange names. But Nina found it unnecessary. After all, they'd only met twice. Reluctantly, she told him her name. By then, Rossi had already developed feelings for her. Using the excuse that he'd feel guilty letting her walk away in a soaked gown, he offered to buy her a new one. "I'm not a weirdo, I promise," he added quickly. But his overly thoughtful gesture made it hard not to misunderstand his intentions. Nina sighed and asked bluntly, "What exactly are you trying to do?" With a gentle smile, Rossi dropped to one knee and reached out his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance?" he asked softly. Nina was caught off guard. She hesitated for a moment but ultimately declined. Disappointed, Rossi looked at her sincerely. "Please just give me a chance. I might be falling for you." Nina raised a skeptical brow. "We've only met twice." But Rossi replied earnestly, "In love, it's not about how long, it's about fate and sincerity." Nina rolled her eyes. "Love takes time. You can't just claim it from a few encounters." Rossi apologized for being too forward. Nina thought he finally got the hint and would back off. But then he smiled again and said, "Then let's take our time." Nina groaned inwardly. "I don't like you," she stated plainly. Yet Rossi seemed completely unfazed. "But I like you," he said with unwavering resolve. I've loved you since the first moment we met. And I'm not giving up that easily. Ever since Mary was granted the title of the Duke's daughter, she became acutely aware that the king's favor toward her had grown significantly. Determined to become queen as soon as possible, she decided to play her trump card, exposing that the current queen was unable to bear children. At the time, the queen was completely unaware of Mary's scheme. Using the excuse that the king and queen hadn't consummated their marriage and that there was still no pregnancy, Mary suggested a fertility examination for the queen. She claimed it was a well-meaning reminder to help ensure a royal heir would be born soon. Then, twisting the knife, Mary accused the queen of misunderstanding her good intentions. With a wounded expression, she cried out, "How could you treat me like this?" But the queen didn't fall for her act. She saw right through Mary's so-called advice and realized it was nothing but a deliberate humiliation. Meanwhile, the king stood by like a useless ornament, saying absolutely nothing. Emboldened by his silence, Mary smirked. "Your Majesty, aren't you overreacting a little? Unless you're hiding something." Before she could finish her sentence, the queen slapped her hard across the face. And before Mary could react, another slap landed, leaving her stunned with rage. Mary glared back defiantly, but the queen only smiled calmly and said, "As the mistress of this palace, I was simply enforcing order." At that moment, Duke Rain stepped forward, wearing a mask of false concern. He admitted that Mary was at fault but urged the queen to at least consider her opinion. After all, producing an heir was a matter of utmost importance to the royal family. The queen's anger flared instantly. She had been queen for less than a year, and yet they were already doubting her ability to bear children. How dare they? As for the king, once the supreme ruler, Mary now regarded him as worthless. Ever since she realized his affections had shifted, she no longer showed him even the slightest respect. She shouted at him, demanding to know why his heart had changed, pushing all the blame onto the queen, and even maliciously accusing her of seducing the king first. Then Mary openly admitted she had never loved the king at all. It was all his own delusion. He had chosen to see only the mask he placed on her, blinding himself to the truth. She scolded him mercilessly, saying he was like a child who had never escaped the shadows of his past, and finally voiced the truth she had kept hidden. She had never intended to play the part of a loving consort. The only things she ever desired were his throne, his power, and his wealth. Then she drove the knife deep, striking his most painful wound. "You're the man who killed his own mother. No one in this world could ever truly love you." The king's expression froze in disbelief. Whatever illusions he still held about Mary were shattered completely. Mary, however, made no effort to hide her ambition. She told the king to his face that she would become queen, reminding him that it was a promise he himself had once made. She would be the only woman by his side. This time she would not rely on his affection. She would seize the crown with real power in her hands and claim the queen's throne for herself. Meanwhile, Leisure was closely examining the letter Nina had taken from Lady Yuli's room. In the letter, Mary warned Lady Yuli to be cautious. Nina was currently managing the Duke's estate and was far more clever than she appeared. This confirmed Leisure's suspicions. Lady Yuli was indeed Mary's accomplice. But what stood out was that the letter hadn't been burned as instructed. Clearly, there was still a lack of full trust between them. Leisure decided to continue observing for now. Just then, a maid rushed in with alarming news. Mary had barged into the royal council and in front of everyone accused the queen of being barren. She even demanded the king expand his harem. Even more shocking, Duke Rain and several other nobles sided with Mary. The queen was completely bewildered. Why were they so certain she couldn't bear children? Mary was not the kind of woman to gamble her reputation on baseless rumors. If she was making this accusation publicly, she had to be sure. A dreadful thought suddenly struck Leisure. Her face paled. What if she truly couldn't have children? She was supposed to be the most honored woman in the palace, yet now Mary had publicly humiliated her, accusing her of being infertile. The king's mind flashed back to when the queen was selected. It was Mary who had proposed choosing a woman who couldn't bear children. At the time, Mary had tearfully insisted it was the only way she could secure her place as queen. Without such a strategy, there would be no justifiable reason to dethrone the current queen. With a pitiful look, she claimed it broke her heart to hurt an innocent woman, but she was only doing it out of love for the king. Now, replaying those words in his mind, the king felt a deep sense of regret. He finally realized every word Mary had said had been a carefully crafted lie. At that moment the queen arrived. She had learned that Duke Rain and other nobles had submitted a joint petition, urging the king to take concubines. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Your Majesty, am I truly infertile?" The king avoided the truth, brushing it off by saying it was just a routine checkup. The queen was furious. She snapped, "Do you think Mary would make such a bold move without proof?" Her eyes narrowed, certain the king was hiding something. She asked again, "Am I truly infertile?" This time the king stayed silent. The queen's confusion deepened. How could they know she couldn't have children when she had never even been tested? A sudden chill ran through the queen's heart. With a bitter smile, she realized the truth. It must have been the medical exam during the queen's selection that exposed her infertility. That was why she had been chosen. Her voice trembled as she confronted the king. "How could you be so cruel?" She had once pitied him, even felt a flicker of compassion. Now she hated herself for it. Rage consumed her. If she could, she'd kill Mary with her own hands. Fighting back tears, the queen asked coldly, "And how are you any different from Ellie?" To her, the king was no better than the woman who had ruined her life. He had dragged her into a nightmare just the same. So the king said nothing. Deep down he knew he had no right to apologize. His silence was his guilt. The queen steadied herself. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. "You are truly despicable. You brought me pain. I'll pray for you, to suffer twice as much in return." Not long after, Mary was officially named royal consort. Her first act as consort? She set fire to her father and stepmother's home, killing them both. Then she destroyed the man who once violated her, leaving him bankrupt and ruined. The queen couldn't help but sneer when she heard the news. She even killed her own family. Is there anything that woman won't do? Aren't you afraid of divine punishment? The queen mocked. But Mary played innocent and replied, "I have no family left, only Duke Rain and his wife." The queen said no more. She would wait and see just how long Mary's delusions would last. With all the truth laid bare, the queen was no longer the same. She had paid enough for her naivete and softness. It was time to strike back. The queen handed a small ornate box to Myria and asked softly, "Have you ever heard of Starin?" She explained it had a wonderfully soothing scent, so enchanting that a country in the east had even given it a poetic name. In those distant lands, it was often burned in incense burners, much like perfume, its fragrance seeping into clothing and skin. The queen had refined it into a liquid form, an elegant perfume. With a gentle smile she added, "It was careless of me. His Majesty has taken a new consort, surely something worth celebrating. As queen, how could I not offer a gift?" Mary received the gift not long after, but she scoffed at it. To her, it was nothing more than the queen's pitiful attempt to curry favor. After all, the queen couldn't bear children. Just keeping her title was a miracle in itself. Now that she was the only woman in the palace capable of producing an heir, Mary had grand ambitions. She would give birth to the next prince and make sure he became the crown prince. Then once the king neared death, she'd quietly poison the queen, clearing her path to becoming the Empress Dowager. As Mary indulged in her fantasy, a maid gently reminded her, "Your Majesty, it's been quite some time since the king last visited Bayron Palace." But Mary waved it off. She was only 27, she had plenty of time. Even if something went wrong, she could always find a way to get pregnant. One way or another she would succeed. The king's birthday was approaching, and in the Nars Empire, there was a long-standing tradition. If one was unmarried, birthday flowers were presented by the parents. If the person was married, the flower had to come from their spouse, making it a direct expression of the giver's heartfelt feelings. For the unmarried, the chosen blooms usually carried meanings of familial love and blessings. But for the married, the flowers often symbolized eternal devotion and romantic commitment. Yet the queen, now bitter and disillusioned, had no intention of expressing love. If she could, she would have sent flowers that carried a curse. But he was still the king. She couldn't afford to cause a scandal during such a grand celebration attended by the empire's nobility. She even considered having Mary deliver the flowers on her behalf, but she had already signed off on the final arrangements for the event. In the end, the queen made her decision: she would send carnations. When Sophie and Myria heard this, they were genuinely puzzled. After all, carnations were traditionally exchanged between parents and children in the empire. Their meanings were always warm and uplifting: red for good health, pink for love, and blue for happiness. But the queen had chosen yellow carnations, the only color that bore a cruel message. Yellow symbolized disdain and hatred. It perfectly embodied how she now felt toward the king. On his birthday, she would send her own silent curse. In her heart, she believed it was the king who had pushed her into becoming this version of herself. Ever since learning the truth about her infertility, she had been haunted by recurring nightmares. In her dreams, she wandered through a strange, cold place, where voices whispered viciously around her. "You are a barren woman. A sterile queen who has doomed the imperial bloodline." She would sob and try to defend herself. "It wasn't my fault." But the voices never stopped. The one who should have been queen was your sister. Had she taken the throne, the bloodline would still be pure. Each time she would awaken from the nightmare sobbing uncontrollably, tears already soaking her pillow. No one knew the queen was tormented like this every single day. She muttered under her breath, "I can't let a concubine bear the heir." And with that she bolted out of the palace in a frenzy. That day she instructed Milia to deliver 100 roses to Buran Palace. Her request was very specific. Pick only the most stunning ones, as beautiful as the palace's mistress herself. Milia was baffled. She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Your Majesty, are you feeling unwell?" The queen merely chuckled. Milia's reaction was exactly what she had hoped for. It meant her loyalty was still intact. Soon, Mary received the roses from the queen and was utterly confused. What on earth was this about? Was the queen trying to play some sort of mind game? But then she reconsidered. That didn't make sense. The queen had always been proud and strong-willed. She wasn't the type to resort to bluffing, especially when there was no clear motive. Could it be the queen had discovered she was barren? Unlike the deposed Queen Ellie, she had no powerful family to back her. Maybe she feared Mary would give birth to a royal heir, threatening her position as queen, and this was her way of trying to curry favor? Mary couldn't wrap her head around it. Still, the thought made her smirk. So much for that high and mighty attitude. Seems the proud queen had finally run out of moves. But Mary wasn't about to let her guard down. She immediately ordered her maids to closely monitor the queen's palace. Everything had to be set right. She would become the most honored woman in the entire empire.